Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to our conference here today, and thank you for attending. This is our first ever virtual Salmon Recovery Conference, and we have more than 1,200 people who have registered and are participating. The number online right now is huge. I'm just amazed at all of you. It's another first for us. I'm sure this has been a year of many firsts for all of you. As you've moved into your offices, worked from home, started schooling your own children, you've worn masks, and we've all adjusted our lives in countless ways as we've dealt with this pandemic. I think that makes this conference especially nice to be able to get together, even if virtually, with our friends. So welcome. As many of you know, I'm retiring this year after more than 30 years of state service. In fact, I've spent the bulk of it at the Recreation and Conservation Office. In fact, these are my last few days. My retirement date is Friday this week. And so there's no other way I'd rather be spending them is with you. Well, unless it was poolside with a margarita. But for the time being, today is where I'm at, and I'm with you. It's been an incredible ride, and one of the things I'm most proud of is the maturing of the salmon recovery efforts, your efforts. I've watched as we've learned how to write recovery plans, as we've learned how to develop projects, recruit landowners, and complete those projects. I think that you'll notice in this week's conference, we've progressed from the topics of the first year, which were how to do projects, how to recruit volunteers, to today, where we're talking about what's coming out with the latest science and how to address those bigger challenges, such as climate change and population growth. We've come a long way in the past 20 years, and I'm thrilled to have been on the journey for much of that. I wish you well in your continued endeavors, and I will continue to drive by your projects with pride. So to start this conference out with dignity and respect that it deserves, I'll turn the screen over to Elizabeth Butler, one of the Salmon Recovery Funding Board grant managers, for a tribal land acknowledgement. Elizabeth?
Good morning, everybody. We're practicing something new this year. We'd like to open this meeting. Let's see, hold on just a minute before I begin. Caleb, can you cue the background, please? We'd like to open this meeting with an Indigenous land acknowledgement to recognize and respect Indigenous communities in Washington and to inspire improvements in RCO policy and programs. What might change if every Washington citizen cultivated an awareness of the history and legacy of colonialism? We are all standing on Indigenous land. I've crafted this statement specifically for my home office, the land I live and work on in Seattle, Washington. This land has been the home of the Duwamish, the Suquamish, the Tulalip, and the Muckleshoot nations since time immemorial. If you haven't read the treaty that governs your region of Washington, I hope you will. Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution declares treaties the supreme law of the land. For Seattle, the Treaty of Point Elliott established a government-to-government relationship between the U.S. and each represented tribe, which includes the Duwamish, Suquamish, Lummi, Muckleshoot, Sammamish, Sauk Seattle, Skagit, Skykomish, Snohomish, Snoqualmie, and Swinomish nations. Chief Seattle was the first to sign this treaty in 1855 as the chief of Duwamish and Suquamish tribes, along with 3 other Duwamish subchiefs. At the time the treaty was negotiated, the tribes had few choices. Under threat of war, they were offered peaceful settlement of their traditional lands. Despite the power imbalance, the tribes did not completely cede their homeland. In signing the Treaty of Point Elliott, all the tribes were guaranteed reservations, and they reserved rights to fish in usual and accustomed areas and to hunt and gather roots and berries on lands beyond the reservation. Yet there are no encumbrances on Washington title to reflect these reserved rights. Only a few months after the treaty was signed, settlers violated the agreement, and violations continue to this day. For example, the Duwamish tribe's been fighting for federal recognition for years. They were federally recognized on January 19, 2001 by the Clinton administration, only to have that decision reversed on a procedural issue 2 days later by the Bush administration. And their appeal is pending today in the Interior Board of Indian Appeals. I recognize the tribal sovereignty of the Duwamish, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations and acknowledge the erasures and atrocities at the foundation of the United States and that brought the city of Seattle and many of its citizens much prosperity and that are ongoing. I am sincerely grateful these native sovereign nations are still here today, demonstrating generosity and resilience and finding ways to lead and sustainably shape the region and the nation. Tribes like the Nisqually, the Jamestown Sklallam, the Port Gamble Sklallam, the Skokomish, the Squaxin, the Stillaguamish, and the Tulalip use Salmon Recovery Funding Board grants to acquire land for habitat protection and restoration. These tribes and others are using surfboard funds to reconnect floodplains, plant riparian forests, and reintroduce natural habitat forming processes to undo more than 150 years of unsustainable impacts from colonial settlers. I like to think I've been doing good work advancing environmental conservation over the past 20 years of my career. But look closely. Conservation has been used as a tool to dispossess and displace Indigenous people from their sacred lands since 1916, when the National Park Service was created. In his article, Return the National Parks to the Tribe, this month in The Atlantic, David Trower makes a compelling case, shining light on the history and proposing a path forward. Here in Washington, we don't have to go far to imagine a different future. Just about 75 miles north of Seattle, the Swinomish Nation co-manages Kukatali Preserve with Washington State Parks as part of the Deception Pass unit. With Deborah Holland of the Laguna Pueblo confirmed as our first Native American Secretary of Interior, I hope the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the National Park Service will begin to shift in ways that advance environmental justice and tribal sovereignty and disrupt and dismantle colonialism. And we at RCO hope that this practice of acknowledging Indigenous lands will help us evolve as an agency too. We seek to learn, to spark conversations, to improve relationships, and to take action as an institution and as individuals. As you participate in this virtual Salmon Recovery Conference, please take a moment to consider the Indigenous land you reside and work on. May it be your home office, a project site, a watershed, and offer a sense of gratitude for the Indigenous communities who have stewarded this land and water long before we arrived. Then envision actions you can take, and together, let's do something to begin to live up to our credo of equality and justice for all. Thank you for your time, and I hope you have a great experience this week at the 2021 Salmon Conference.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think we all echo your message of gratitude from the different parts of the state where we all sit. It is my honor now to introduce the Port Gamble Sklallam canoe family performing Salmon Warrior Song from their longhouse.
Hi, Squatchiness. We're the Port Gamble Sklallam canoe family. I want to thank you for having us sing your opening song for your conference today. We're going to be singing the Salmon Warrior Song. It was created by Janet Cameron, the Makah Nation, for the 3 Sklallam bands, and our skipper, Mike Jones.
Thank you to the members of the Port Gamble Sklallam Canoe family for that very moving introductory music. It has a way of reaching into my soul, and I so appreciate your participation today. It is my pleasure to introduce the governor. I'm hoping that I'm going to be introducing the governor. I can't see if he's online yet, but it's my pleasure to introduce him. He's taken time out of his busy schedule to say a few words to us. Governor Inslee is a fifth-generation Washingtonian who has lived both in urban settings and rural settings across the state, on both sides of the state. He began serving as governor in 2013, and under his leadership, Washington is consistently the only state that ranks as the best place to work and the best place to do business. Governor Inslee has long been a supporter of salmon recovery from his days when he served as a congressman and to his time now in the governor's mansion. Please join me in welcoming Governor Inslee. Caleb, I am assuming that you're going to move the governor in. If not, I'll move on to something else, and we'll come back when the governor can join us. Okay, thank you. Well, I'm going to introduce my partner in crime here, Jeff BRECKEL. Jeff is the chair of the Salmon Recovery Funding Board, and he is going to do some thank yous. And he's walked many miles in your shoes as he was the Lower Columbia Recovery Executive Director and very involved in efforts in the Lower Columbia and in the Columbia Basin on salmon recovery. Jeff, are you online yet?
I am. Thank you. And Kaleen, I want to thank you. As you noted, we've worked together for far more than a decade, and I will truly miss working with you, your collaboration, and your friendship. You've been a leading force for salmon recovery in this state, and you fought for our funding in the legislature and Congress. You've worked to streamline our processes and make them work for our landowners and our project sponsors. And you've supported us so that we're getting the most from those resources on the ground for the salmon and across a broad spectrum of interest in this state, from the average citizen to agencies to tribal organizations to local governments. So your contributions have left a legacy that shows that Washingtonians, when we come together, really know the value of our salmon to our economy, to our recreation, to our environment, to our wildlife, to our culture and our heritage, and really to our souls. And I want to thank you for your hard work and dedication to salmon recovery. And I hope that you enjoy your time away from the alarm clocks and schedules. And please remember, on that first morning of retirement, turn the alarm clock off. I have been privileged to be part of salmon recovery for over 20 years and to attend all of these conferences in the past, and they're energizing. I have learned so much. I have met so many folks. I have developed an understanding of just how and difficult this task is. But these conferences bring us together as a salmon community. And I would also just like to take a moment to note that over the last few years, we've developed a statewide salmon recovery network that brings together those of us in the salmon recovery community, whether they be state agencies, tribes, local governments, nonprofit organizations, just to talk about how we can work together, because we know that when we are working together, we can accomplish great things. With regard to this particular conference, before we get too far along, I want to I want to take a moment just to thank the people who have sponsored this virtual conference and have worked hard to make it possible. The Salmon Recovery Funding Board has, in the past years, provided the basic funding for this conference, but we couldn't do it alone. We rely on a number of sponsoring organizations and on the volunteer efforts of many people. The NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, for their funding contributions. The Pacific Coastal Salmon Recovery Fund has been a constant baseline and foundation for our efforts over the past 20 years. And their efforts to work with us, to guide our efforts, have been the backbone of much of our work. NOAA for their help. I also want to move on to our platinum sponsors. These are contributors of more than $750, and they come from many of the state agencies and business and nonprofits who are actively working to make salmon recovery a reality. So I want to thank them. They include Interfluve and King County, Natural Systems Design, the Wild Salmon Center, the State Department of Ecology, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Washington Department of Natural Resources, Forest Practices Division, the Washington Department of Transportation's Environmental Services, and the Washington Forest Protective Association. Our gold sponsors, and those folks that have contributed $500 to bring us all together, include Blue Coast Engineering, ESA, Trout Unlimited, and Wolfwater Resources. We don't want to forget our silver sponsors who contributed $250, thanks to Tierra Right-of-Way Services Limited and Contact Engineering Solutions. And our bronze sponsors each contributed $100. So thanks to them, the Washington Association of Land Trusts and Par Excellence. I would also want to extend my thanks and gratitude to those folks who have worked so hard to put this conference together, the committees, the Western Washington University, who's providing services, that has organized a virtual conference for us and is helping us to be successful. I also want to thank the steering committee, which had to make tough decisions in trying to balance all the topics we have and trying to put together a conference, quite frankly, with the challenge of COVID. And in that particular sense, I really want to thank Jeannie Abbott, who has been the sort of conference lead this year. And this is the first time she's taken on that task. And COVID threw her kind of a curveball which she's done a fantastic job of coordinating all the input, all the speakers, and all the folks that are behind making this a success. And her boss, Eric Netherland, the executive coordinator for the Salmon Recovery Office, has done a great job in supporting her and moving this ahead. This is also his first time in shepherding this conference too, and his knowledge and skills and patience are really greatly appreciated. With those thank yous, Kaleen, I would pass that back to you.
Okay. Do we have the governor online yet? Okay. I'm going to then jump into our first panel, which we might have to interrupt a little bit if the governor does show up online. So with that, I'm going to introduce our first panel of speaker. The first person on the panel is somebody you're all familiar with, one of my favorite people in the world, David TROUTT. David is the former chair of the Salmon Recovery Funding Board and has served as the Natural Resources Director for the Nisqually Indian Tribe since 1987. He has a diverse department focused on salmon, shellfish, and other wildlife, and the environment in general, with duties including management, legal, administration, budget development, research, and monitoring. He also serves as chair of the Nisqually River Council, president of the Nisqually River Foundation, and chair of the Puget Sound Salmon Recovery Council. And these are just his current boards. He has a long career of public service work, and we are honored to have him join us today. Let's welcome David. Oh, sorry, David. You're being preempted.
That's okay.
Thank you, Governor, for joining us. I have already introduced you, so I'm going to turn the microphone over to you.
Thank you, Kaleen. Kaleen, apologies for the technical difficulties. Can you see me by chance? I can't see myself.
Yes, I can see you.
Great. Well, usually it's a conspiracy to try to black out my visual image. I don't understand why, but in any event, thank you for a chance to join you. My apologies for the delay. Kaleen, thank you for your leadership. I know everybody on this call loves what you've done for our state, for our salmon by extension, and for people's connection to the ecosystem that support our salmon. We so much appreciate your leadership. And we know we have so much to celebrate today, which is your career, and also the fact that we're going to see Billy Frank Jr. in the Statuary Hall, Washington State's #1 salmon champion for all time. And that's something that should inspire us today. It certainly inspires me on a daily basis. And to know that we will get to see him and his message of salmon, because anytime that anybody walks by the statue of Billy Frank Jr. in Statuary Hall is going to have to think of salmon. So we'll have the whole country engaged in our effort. We need the whole country and the whole state engaged in this effort, because we know, simply put, as salmon go, so go we. Salmon are connected to everything in our lives, from essentially assuring that we have forests, because salmons deliver nutrient up to the mountains. It means that we have clean water if we have salmon, so that we can enjoy clean water. Salmon is connected to everything in our lives that make Washington who we are. It's as Washingtonian as Mount Rainier. And so we know we are committed today to doing everything we can to the preservation of this incredible blessing. I was going to say resource, but I think more of actually a blessing is the right way to think of salmon in our state. And I know everybody in this conference shares that view with me. I hope you know that I'm committed to working with everybody on this call on this very divine mission that we are on. I've got 4 grandchildren. It is my commitment that I'm going to do what I can do to say that their grandchildren and everybody's grandchildren on this call will enjoy this central heartbeat of the state of Washington. And we know we have so many challenges. Just this morning's newspaper, I read that the size of our salmon have declined significantly, enough to potentially damage the industry. And I just, that just tugs at my heart to read that on a beautiful spring morning when the blossoms are out, to think that that's what's happening to these incredible species. So I'm highly motivated. I know everybody in this call is highly motivated. So let's turn that motivation into action. I just want to talk about some of the things that I want to join you on. I want to join you on our repairing and restoration efforts and protection. We hope this fall to have a proposal in this regard. Frankly, I've been frustrated we haven't got this done yet. And this is we're gonna put pedal to the metal in this regard. We know repairing habitat's so crucial in our recovery efforts. We know we have harvest management improvements to work on together on sovereign-to-sovereign relationship with our tribal sovereigns, and there's much work to be done. We know we need better enforcement and monitoring and exploring renewable energy sources across the state of Washington. We know we need to continue to work on reintroduction of species above Chief Joseph and Grand Coulee that we have committed the state to. And we know we have to work with everyone, forestry industry, agriculture, and shellfish communities, and local governments to go beyond no net loss and achieve net ecological gain. We are committed to that. We know that we need to fix our culverts, and I'm pleased that there's a $1 billion commitment to that in this year's budget. So we know the things we need to do. Some are local, some are more global. But I'm committed to working with everybody on this call and the things that I just referenced. And we have no time to lose. We know we are on the edge of the abyss in so many different ways. And so I'm committed to putting pedal to the metal in that regard. Now, one of the issues that are threatening to salmon, and I want to mention this with a little in-depth discussion, amongst all of our sort of immediate problems right in front of our nose, culverts, riparian habitat, hatchery operations, these immediate things that are so critical to salmon sometimes have the capability of blinding us to this looming threat over our heads, which could make everything we're doing for naught. And that's the threat of carbon pollution and methane pollution and climate change and ocean acidification. These are the existential crises we face. And that while we kind of have to think short-term and long-term, we are committed to these efforts of riparian habitat. We are committed to culverts, but we have to be equally or even greater committed to stopping the climate change, which would eliminate the gains that we could make from all of these short-term measures. And that's why I'm pleased that the legislature this year has made some progress in passing the Cap and Invest Bill, the Climate Commitment Act, and the Clean Fuel Standard Bill, both of which have the potential to significantly reduce carbon pollution in our state. The Climate Commitment Act, as you know, would create finally a cap, a binding limit when it's implemented on carbon pollution in our state. And there's a lot to feel good about that act. It's very sophisticated. I think the legislature did a great job working with tribal communities and everyone else to really put meaningful legislation on the barb. And an important part of this is it has the best environmental justice provisions in the history of the United States. Now, we're pretty humble in our state, but this is an accurate statement. This has the best environmental justice, the best measures to be able to stop concentrations of toxicity in overburdened communities, the best concentration of investments to overburdened communities. And that's a very important part of this, because while we are saving salmon, we ought to save justice as well and embody equity in everything we do, including our climate policy. And I'm very pleased to report to you the legislature has done better than any other legislature in American history on that score. On the Clean Fuel Standard, we know that this is going to give people good, cleaner fuels, to give consumers, to break the stranglehold of some of the industrial folks that have not given us cleaner fuels. We know it's technologically possible, and we know it can be done economically, because when these policies have been in place, we have not seen significant rises in fuel prices. So now we need to get both these bills implemented as soon as humanly possible. Another issue I want to mention is transportation. We need a transportation package from the legislature. It's one thing that we've not accomplished yet that can reduce pollution coming from our transportation system, that can give people more options, provide maintenance, and maintenance important too. We don't want our roads falling into our creeks or our bridges falling into our rivers. So this is one thing we've got to work on, and I'll look forward in the upcoming weeks with the legislature to continue this effort. I hope everyone on this call will be engaged in this effort. So I just want to thank everybody on this call. I know everybody shares this commitment. I'm excited about these prospects. I think these are great days in the sense that we have kind of a unique possibility. And that is to say that we stood for salmon to the 7th generation. And I believe that is a noble purpose that we all have. We know that that is a purpose to save this blessing for generations to come. And I look forward to working with everybody in that regard. Thanks a million. Looking forward to celebrate Billy Frank's spirit and his action that we were all called upon to follow. Thanks very much. Thanks, Kaleen.
It's been a pleasure to work with you, and your words are so inspiring. And please know that we're here to support your call for bringing back salmon and for taking care of our riparian areas. and more importantly, to make sure that there are salmon for the 7 generations yet to come. I'd like to thank you for all your support of me over the years. You've been great to work for, and it's been a pleasure. So with that, I'll go back to David Trout for the first of the panelists.
Thank you, Kaleen, and thank you, Governor. And fits right into how we want to try to deal with some of the issues here with our building of movement discussion here in this opening session. So thank you very much for those words. And Kaleen, love you, and you've made such a tremendous difference in the state of Washington. You should feel really proud, and we're all proud of you. So thank you. So as mentioned, my name is David Trout. I've been with the Nisqually Indian Tribe since 1987. And I'm going to speak to you today a little bit about urgency of the work that we're doing and the sacrifices probably needed to make it really be successful at the end of the day. And I like to do these through stories, if you all don't know me. And so I'm going to start off with the story. But first, I have to start off with my typical greeting for everyone. Aloha. And I can hear 1,200 alohas coming back. So thank you for that. In 1987, when I was hired by Billy, and we spent a lot of time together working on stuff, one of my early assignments was to attend his breakfast meetings and to be up to date on the issues and to help him move through issues. But probably most importantly, my other assignment was to cut up the pancakes and breakfast sausages for his son, Willie Frank, who was 5 years old at the time. And so I took both assignments very seriously, and to the great benefit of all of us, Willie Frank survived my breakfast duties, and now 34 years later is a third-term council member and currently running for chair of the Nisqually Indian Tribe. And so where else but in Indian country can you start off cutting up pancakes for somebody who eventually then becomes your boss? And it's been an amazing journey to watch that happen. And Willie is not only a council member, but he's also a fisherman. And his story is important here. And I'll come back to that shortly about how it fits into all of the work and the urgency. The other equally serious assignment that Billy gave me was to work on all things salmon in the Nisqually watershed, to restore salmon, to honor the treaty rights, and to be sure that our fishing practices were continual and that we had that connection to the river. And so when I started in 1987, we were fishing 105 days a year sustainably from July through March, fishing for all the various runs of salmon that came into the Nisqually, and doing quite well. In 2015, we fished 8 days. So from 105 days to 8 days in my lifetime, in a very short period of time, primarily because of loss of salmon populations affected by a number of issues. And you heard the governor talk about some of those issues, but adding on to that would also be localized habitat changes and certainly marine mammal predation and marine survival issues affecting those salmon populations. To the extent we're in the Nisqually River, we have 2 ESA listed populations of Chinook and steelhead, and we're desperately trying to recover those fish. Now, one of the things that Billy would always say is that in the Nisqually, you learned how to be a fisherman by fishing in the summer for Chinook and coho, but you became a true fisherman by fishing in the winter for our lake chum and steelhead. And we have these unique runs of fish that return late in the Nisqually, and they're the last returns of the season. It would sustain the tribe through the dry period between the last steelhead and the first spring Chinook, which could sometimes be months. And so incredibly important fishery, incredibly important time for the tribe to be on the river. Traditions and cultures and campsites and everything was all driven around the timing of steelhead and chum salmon. Those populations have dwindled tremendously. When I started again, we had the strongest wild run of steelhead in Puget Sound, up there with the same numbers that we would see in the Skagit, of 8,000 to 10,000 fish strong. By 1992, the population had dropped to 500 fish, and we went from catching thousands to catching 0 almost overnight. And so that connection to steelhead as becoming a fisherman in the Nisqually was being lost and is being lost, and really speaks to the urgency of trying to do something quickly for the benefit of the resource and the benefit of the tribe. Willie Frank has been a fisherman now for a better part of his life, I should say, 23 years, fishing on the Nisqually River. Willie Frank has never caught a steelhead on his river, fishing 23 years. That's just not something that should be acceptable to any of us, and something that motivates me on a daily basis. And where we used to rely on our chum salmon being such a strong, healthy population, in the last 5 years, we've had no fishery in 4 of those years. And we're seeing what we would call the bread and butter of our salmon resource dwindle as well. And so we're beginning to lose these things. We're beginning to lose these connections. And we need to do something quick. And the quickness isn't only around what's necessary to protect the resource for the benefit of the tribes, which is critically important in the cultures and traditions, but for all of us and the role they play in the ecosystem. And that's all being challenged. And so we need to really step up the pace of the work that we're doing with a real sense of urgency, because it's a problem. Now, to get this work done, the governor pointed out there's been some big progress being made in the legislature this session. You're going to hear more of that from some of our following speakers. There's a future promise of additional progress being made. But at the end of the day, it's going to take some amount of sacrifice by all of us to make this happen. And I think back to, not when I was alive, but just through lessons learned, that we have a history of being able to do that as a country and as a region, of making personal sacrifice when we rally behind a cause or rally behind a dream. December 7th, 1941, the day which will live in infamy. Everybody remembers and has learned about what that day means. But what we don't teach in the schools and learn as much is what happened on December 8th or January 15th or February 3rd of the following months. And what we saw as a country was a complete shift in our responsibilities and our commitment to each other that was very different than was before on December 6th, 1941. Enlistments went from 11,000 soldiers, people enlisting in the various armed services in 1941 prior to the attack, to over 170,000 by May of the following year, to 700,000 by the end of 1942. Industries changed, families changed, things all focused around accomplishing a common objective. And we as a country sacrificed tremendously for that cause. And we're successful at the end of the day. Another great example is the moon, the getting to the moon, when President Kennedy said we need to get there, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. We rallied behind a vision, behind a hope, and the country supported it. We dug deep. We paid for that effort, and we got there. We were successful. And as we're sitting here today having a virtual conference, which is amazing, we've got 1,200 plus people of us sitting here doing this, which is spectacular. This represents a more recent test of our will and test of our strength and our sacrifice on a common cause. It's now time to sacrifice for the salmon. It's now time for us to step up and make those changes in our personal lives, in our community, within our families, within a region, to support the thing that we care so much about. And it's going to take change. It's going to take significant change, and we don't have a lot of time to make those changes. We're going to have to pay for this. We're going to have to pay for this in ways that we have not paid for yet. Our habitat is being challenged, and the only way to get back to being productive for these salmon is to protect what we have and restore the critical habitat. And the longer we wait, the more expensive it gets. And so reaching to new ways of having relationships with our private and public partners to support salmon recovery, creative, innovative ways is going to be absolutely critical. Having the conversation in your dining rooms and in your schools and in your churches about how important this is, so that we can build the momentum, build the movement to support what's necessary to do for salmon. And at the end of the day, thinking about how we live on the landscape is going to have to change. In the Puget Sound region, in my time in the last 34 years, we have a strong tendency to grow out and not up. And though that ever increasing footprint is having impacts on salmon and our ability to get the work done. And so we need to think about changing the way we live on the landscape, and not only think about it, but do it, and do it now, because the time is now if we're going to make a difference for salmon, for tribes' treaty rights, for things that depend on salmon like southern resident killer whales and all of our fishing communities. The clock is ticking and it's time to do it now. And we can do it. We have done it. We have a history of doing it. And so now it's time for us to all rally together, hand in hand, build this movement, reach out to 10 people that you all know, bring them in, teach them about salmon and the importance of salmon recovery, and let's get this done. Let's support the things that the governor wants to get done. And let's do it as a state together, unified, because we know this is the right thing to do. And if it's not going to be us that does that reaches across the table, who's it going to be? If it's not now for us to do this and really make the sacrifice and reach across the table again, when's it going to happen? So really, it is time. And I love all of you and all the work that you've done, and you've done amazing work together in the watersheds doing salmon recovery. But we may have to extend our workload a little bit. I'm just going to ask just for a little bit. And that is to get the word out and to expand this movement so that we can have a future that has salmon in it, that has treaty fishermen on the Nisqually River fishing for steelhead and chum salmon and learning the ways that Billy taught us to do on the Nisqually River, and have that for generations to come. So with that, I thank you, and I'll turn it back over to Kaleen.
Thank you, David. You inspire me, so thank you. I almost said you complete me, but that would have been good too. Next, I'd like to introduce a longtime friend and our new Lieutenant Governor, the Honorable Denny HECK. Denny most recently served as our congressman from the 10th district here around Thurston County and Pierce County. He also served as Chief of Staff to Governor Booth Gardner, and he was my boss in the early 90s. Before that, he was the Majority Leader in the Washington State House of Representatives and Chief Clerk of the House. He founded and served as Chief Executive Officer of TVW, and he also served 8 years in Congress, co-founding the Congressional Puget Sound Caucus. He's always been a friend and supporter of salmon and salmon recovery. And let's welcome our Lieutenant Governor. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaleen. Mic check, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I want to join the parade of Kaleen Cottingham fans and acknowledge and express my appreciation and celebrate her spectacular career in state government. It's nothing short of amazing. And the previous panelist, David TROUTT, my good friend, thank you for all you do and have done over a long period of time. Thanks to everybody that's watching this, that participates on a day in, day out basis on the effort to recover our salmon runs. And last, I want to take the opportunity to thank one of my other panelists, Representative Lukanoff, for her amazing work as a state legislator. I appreciate everything she has done in the environmental space and others over time. And of course, this year, I especially appreciate her incredible leadership to pass the legislation to put Billy in Statuary Hall in the nation's capital. And I'll be real direct about it. It wouldn't happen without her. So I raise my hands in respect to you, Deb. Bless you. So speaking of Billy, and these events should never come and go without us all speaking of Billy. Some of you have heard me tell the story about my attendance at the ceremony at which we unveiled his tombstone, which was, of course, a year after he walked on. And frankly, it turned out to be a stunning experience for me. I did not know what to expect. And when the blanket was removed, there were the words that leapt off the tombstone: "We're running out of time." And I have to admit, somewhat embarrassingly, that my first reaction was, well, that's kind of a negative thought. Billy was such a positive person. But Billy was right. He was absolutely right. Of course he was right. So Billy continues to teach us, even from beyond the veil. Since the first Snake River sockeye was listed more than 30 years ago, I think I have this right, now more than 14 other salmon species have been added as either threatened or endangered. 10 of them aren't making any progress. 5 are in crisis. So the bottom line, we're running out of time. And there are a lot of reasons for this. A lot of people have already talked about it thus far during the conference about habitat and passage. Some of you know that what I feel especially strongly about is the role of water quality in the Puget Sound. I have to remind people all the time, the Puget Sound is the largest estuary in the United States. That means it's a big giant bathtub, frankly, the way it works. And all the bad land use decisions and all the other bad decisions kind of flow into it. And as you also know, and have heard me say, much of this has to do with stormwater runoff, and that has been well documented. The Water Quality Research Center at Washington State University in Puyallup has documented the negative impact of stormwater runoff on fish runs, and it is devastating, and it gets more challenging every year, and we all know why. It's because the population of the Puget Sound catchment basin continues to grow, but as David said, it grows out, not up, and we're creating more and more impermeable surfaces. So the real question, obviously, is are we going to act in a big and bold enough way before time runs out? Or, pardon my language here, I want to be very direct, or will we all be damned to hell because we stood by as one salmon species after another grew extinct? That's the question. Now, we know we need to act. We've already laid that case out today, sooner rather than later, bigger rather than smaller. We all know we need to act because we have a legal, and I would argue a moral obligation to uphold our end of the treaties with Indian country, a moral obligation as well as a legal one which has been upheld 100% of the time and time after time whenever it's been litigated. We all know we need to act because the large economic ecosystem associated with the salmon is in peril. When I was with the Gardner administration and the spotted owl issue arrived, we saw the beginning of an unfortunate and tragic long-term trend of some of these communities being devastated by the consequences of that without appropriate balancing, mitigating effects on those communities. And I would argue that we can begin to see the same things for communities when salmon runs decline so deeply in places like Ilwaco and Westport, and I could go on and on. And we all know we need to act because at the end of the day, the salmon is truly our canary in the mine. It's the direct correlate of our treasured quality of life, something that is core to our identity as people who are privileged enough, blessed enough to live in the Pacific Northwest. What we don't need to do, my friends, is despair despite all this, to stop believing in ourselves and our ability to make a difference here because we can, because despite the threat, we have plenty of muscle memory in this state, plenty of getting things done to protect our environment. After all, I think we were the very first state in the nation to create a State Department of Ecology or Environmental Quality. That was 50 years ago in 1970. And over the years, we just keep adding to our commitment to it, whether it's the Shorelines Management Act or the Model Toxic Control Act, the Timber, Fish, and Wildlife, the Forest Practices Act, the Forest Practices Habitat Conservation Plans, and on and on and on. And as the governor so eloquently laid out, and for which he is entitled to so much credit, in just this legislative session, truly historic action with the Climate Commitment Act and adoption of low carbon fuel standards. We know how to act. We know how to act. It is not a time for despair. It is a time for resolve. But let our sense of urgency be underscored by Billy's wisdom. We are running out of time. Thank you.
Again, great words to get us off into our conference here. You inspire me, like David Trout and the governor. Great words, and thank you. Thank you for all those years ago being my boss. Next speaker was just mentioned, State Representative, the Honorable Deborah Lekanoff. Deborah represents the 40th Legislative District, which includes parts of Whatcom, Skagit, and San Juan counties. She is the only Native American woman to currently serve in the legislature. She has called the Skagit Valley home for nearly 20 years, and she has more than 20 years of government relations experience and was the Governmental Affairs Director for the Swinomish tribe. While in the legislature, she has sponsored more than 200 bills to bring positive change to Washington. Some key areas she has focused on include health and economic recovery efforts from the pandemic, lifting up Washington's workforce, curbing the effects of climate change, and supporting clean energy, green infrastructure, and jobs and workforce training. And as you just heard, to bring the statute of Billy Frank Jr. to the Capitol. Let's welcome Representative Lekanoff.
I'm on Team Cottingham. Congratulations on 30 years of serving Washington State. We're just so thankful for all the work that you've done and the partnerships that you've created. My goodness, we wouldn't be here today celebrating salmon recovery and speaking to this without all the work that you've done, Kaleen. So my heart is with you, my wonderful friend. Speaking of wonderful friends, it's so good to be on following behind Lieutenant Governor Denny HECK. He's been an extraordinary warrior. When he started out in the state legislature, he carried his warriorness out to Congress, and now he's back home with us as a lieutenant governor, serving all of us and building an incredible community that's wrapping our arms around salmon, around climate change, around strong economies. You know, I just wanted to pause a little bit. You know, we talked about stories, and I would be remiss if I didn't say who I am and where I come from. My Thlinkit name is Hickchasee. It comes from those very small, cool and clean waters up where the in-stream flow comes out, where the baby frogs live, where we have cool and clean water. For me, it's important to understand and share that in my name, Hickchasee, it is that time of change. It is those baby frogs. It is that time of where we need a cool habitat and clean water in order for my Thlinkit name to exist. My name has been passed down from generation to generation to generation. It comes from time immemorial. You may all wonder, Deborah, why do you fight for the environment and the salmon, cool and clean water and habitat so hard? Because I have to fight for it to ensure my Thlinkit name, Hickchasee, my Thlinkit values, my laws, my teachings will exist and be passed down from generation to generation to generation. So I fight for cultural justice. I fight for environmental justice. I fight for the mighty salmon. And as my good friend Denny said, and as my good friend Jay said, we're running out of time. This little Alaskan girl showed up almost close to 20 years ago on the shorelines, and I wish you could see outside in Washington State. I sat with tribal leaders, the great leader, Jimmy Wilson, Randy Kinley, Brian Clattisby, Bill Steroid, Russ Hefner, Ben Johnson, Pearl Koppelman. I said, where are your salmon? I come from a place in the shorelines of Yakutat. When the tide is out, the table is set. All 5 species of wild salmon run all year round. The fat on the king salmon from Yakutat is so thick, it's like butter. And they looked at me and they said, our salmon is gone, Deborah. All the river systems in Washington State run off of hatcheries. What you have is what we once had. But we have hope. We have to have hope. We have to invest in salmon recovery. We have to be in charge as Coast Salish people and Salish people from the east to the west of Washington State. We have to fight for that salmon because, like you, Deborah, our names, our laws, our teachings, our cultures come from the mighty salmon. Lummi Nation's leader, Randy Kinley, shared with me at teachings when I came down here. He said, Deborah, let me remind you, and Governor INSLEE stated this today, and Denny led into this. This is a mighty salmon. If you have a mighty salmon, you have cool and clean water and habitat. You have healthy people eating healthy foods. You have prosperous jobs. Around this mighty salmon, you have an incredibly strong economy. You have socially sound communities. With the salmon in one hand, we have a one Washington state. As your state legislator, I have to tell you, the salmon doesn't recognize whether I'm a Republican or a Democrat. The salmon sits in the middle of the floor in the people's house, and he says, take care of me. We're running out of time, and we're not doing enough. We need all governing bodies to be addressing salmon recovery. We have the federal government. We have the state, tribal government, all investing in 8 regional salmon recovery plans and investing in salmon recovery plans for every watershed, sharing science, policies, and laws. And thanks to RCW's salmon projects, we're missing one government, and that's the local government. This year, House Bill 1117, that would have incorporated salmon recovery into local government, was supported by cities and counties. It was supported by tribes. It was supported by the governor's office. My house passed it off of the floor of the people's house and said the mighty salmon is important, and local government is that one branch that wants to be there, that wants to be part of this salmon family. Unfortunately, the Senate did not vote it through. The comment back to me was, it's too much, Deborah. It's too much. You're asking too much. I ask all of you, over 1,200 salmon warriors today, we need to ask too much. We need to rise up. We need to take care of Washington State. Whether you're a commercial fisherman, a tribal fisherman, whether you're driving the car that hauls the salmon to Pike Place Market, whether you're sitting at the table giving the first piece of salmon to your auntie, you need to be a salmon warrior. We don't have enough time. Billy told me when I sat with him as a young girl, I was so excited. I was starstruck by Billy. I couldn't believe he was my uncle, my brother, my teacher, my mentor, all wrapped up in one. He said, Deborah, you have to remember, it takes a lot of patience to be an Indian. Those of you who know me, and Billy knew me, and he smiled. He said, for you, Deborah, especially you as a Tlingit woman, you're going to need a lot of patience because we are stepping forward one step at a time. We're clearing that pathway for the next generation to come behind us. My daughter's daughter will be fighting to protect my Tlingit name, Hishchasi. Willie's and Pagan's children will be fighting to fish as their grandfathers' grandfathers did on the Nisqually. Brian Clattisby will continue to fight and fight and fight so he can have 5 generations fishing on the Skagit River. We're one Washington, my friends. All of our watersheds touch. I urge all of you, call your state legislators. Tell them salmon is vital to Washington State. I am the only Native American woman to sit on that floor in middle of the people's house where the Nisqually drums have been shared into the floor of the people's house, their songs. It is vital for us to rise up together. We can address with that mighty salmon everything we need in Washington State. And as the governor said, we can address climate change. If you have a healthy salmon, you will have a one Washington. You will have a healthy Washington, and you will have one for generations to come. Thank you, Willie, for sharing your dad with me, for sharing Billy with all of us. It takes a lot of patience, but I'm here for the long run, and I'm here to help all of you. Let's rise up and do this together. So with that, I'll pass that on to you. Kaylee, and I think that we're just really all pleased to be here. So thank you for giving me a little bit of time. I do want to do something real quick, and I know I'm supposed to be getting off real quick because my timer's coming, but I just want to share with all 1,200 of you why we're doing what we're doing. Out here at Samish Island, I don't know if you can see that all. When the tide is out, the table is set. And this is exactly what we're fighting for every day. So fight with me for the salmon. So, all right, I'll turn it over to you. I promise I'm done this time.
Future is so bright with you in the legislature. Keep up the good work. Fight the hard fight. We're with you all the way. Thank you, Representative Lekanoff. And with that, I would like to turn to our next speaker, and that is Phil Rigdon. He is the Natural Resources Superintendent for the Confederated Tribes and Bands of the Yakima Nation. Phil grew up on the Yakima Reservation and has been involved in natural resources ever since his college days. He has a bachelor's degree in forestry and went on to earn his master's degree in forestry from the Yale School of Forest Environmental Studies. His first professional job was as the forester for the tribe. Then he moved up to fuels manager and then to deputy director of natural resources, a nearly 25-year career with the tribe. In his current role, he co-manages and protects the Yakima Nation's ancestral, cultural, and treaty natural resources. Let's welcome Phil.
Chuck Meisky, good morning. And I'll start off in Imiwanik Shiakul. My Indian name is Shiakul, and it's an honor to be here and to be part of such a powerful panel. And I too, wish Kaleen the best and thank her for the efforts that she's done for the folks. I'm from the other side of the mountain, and the important part is we do this conversation. We talk about salmon recovery. We talk about the work we're doing. I always think it's important. It goes back to a long history, and our people, the Yakima people, we're tied to place and time. The Columbia River is our home, and all the tributaries and the foods and our stories, our legends, our way of life is tied to these places. Our songs that are passed down continue today, and right now in the springtime, the salmon are starting to return, and we've had our first food feast. We honor this role that we play, and it's a way of our life and a part of our culture. But this fight for our people, and especially with the Yakima people, it's been going on for over 100 years, and we were one of the first, tribes that ended up in the Supreme Court with the Winans decision where the Suffolk Fish Company was trying to stop our access to the Columbia River. And that opened over a long decades and decades of the long fight that we have. And it's that fight that Billy Frank and many of my elders, the people that Atwai Louis Cloud, and I could go on with just so many of our elders that have been teaching us the importance of what the salmon means to us and our culture and the work we do. And I think it culminated. And the interesting part was we're the only tribe, Yakima is a USV Washington and a USV Oregon tribe. But one of the coolest parts was people don't understand the Bologna decision kind of was precedent to the Bolt decision that set half the fish. But back in that time, our tribe, our leadership, those people that spent their lives fighting the fish fight, fighting to have a right to make sure that fish was there available for our people, that we can continue our ceremonies, that we continue to be a part of what was guaranteed to us as part of our treaty that place. And the thing was, but the fish were disappearing. And those elders, they said, what do, if we don't have fish, or what good is a treaty right if there's no fish for the treaty right? And that changed. They hired a biologist, and they invested in my generation. They invested in sending us to school. And I thought that was one of the probably the greatest things that I think that leadership ever did for us. And it is the heart of the thing, because now a bunch of us are tribal members that, run our supplementation, our hatcheries, we do the habitat work, are out there making change. And that's the true honor of that vision that you see. And it's been through conflict and fighting and dealing with that we turned the page, and we've worked to remove a dam on the Condit Dam on the White Salmon River. And you sit there and you talk about the activities that our community and the continued work that goes through all these different things. It's an honor to watch the changing. Where I remember a long time ago, the sports fishermen, we were the enemy, and the stories that were told by our fishermen, you had to go out on the boat with the shotgun and to protect yourself, but our people went, and it was that right to be on the river. But I was at a meeting, one of my first fisheries meeting with the restoration, and those same people that used to be our enemies, they walked up to our people and said, and they shook our hand and said, "We're thankful for you guys. For you there would be no salmon in the Columbia if it wasn't for the fight that us and the other tribes that we work with that are doing." And that work continues today, and you see that with all the different tribes involved, from Yakima, Umatilla, Warm Springs, Nez and on and on. And that work is our promise to the salmon, our promise to sit there as the salmon step forward to us, we step forward to the salmon, to honor it, to respect it, and to fight for it, to make sure. And that's the work and the community that we work with, the different, from all the salmon recovery groups, from all the different, state, federal, and all these things. The one thing that I think I'm most honored is to see the leadership that our tribe and many other tribes have taken onto what co-management means. That we just aren't taking it like we want the fish. We want to be part of the solution. And so I hope that through this discussion and the beauty of what Deb and all these folks have talked about, I think you understand, work with us. We come into the communities, and you could see that with how in the Yakima Basin, the Yakimas, we wrote a letter with our biggest enemy, the Rose Irrigation District, and we said, you know what, let's put a plan together to address both our issues. Let's get fish passage and up above Cle Elum. And right now there's a 100-foot hole, 100 foot deep, and we will have fish passage in 3 or 4 years permanently. And we will continue to work to address all the issues to make these things happen. But the thing that I think we are also aware of is I'm on the dry side of the mountain, where the risk from climate change is increasing, and the work there's too much to do and not enough time, and the resources there to do it is needed. And so that's the inspiration, and the people that we work with that through all of the different groups. It's an honor to be working with them, but it's also the urgency. And so I thank you for that, because I think that's the real important thing for this conversation in my mind, is we really need to continue that urgency, that moving forward and coming together in different communities, because the Yakima ceded territory is 12 million acres and moves up past Lake Chelan all the way down into the Columbia rivers, and that whole area. There are so many different groups and so many different folks, and so I think that's the thing, the inspiration you see from the speakers and the governor and the lieutenant governor to the place where we head, and to my brother, Dave on the west side, on the work that they're doing and the advocacy in Puget Sound. It's going to be us all coming together, but the tribes use us, help us, fight for that thing. And that's the thing that I think is really important to this conversation. And I think this is a true honor to be here to talk and to be part of this, the salmon recovery folks. And thank you for all the work you're doing now to continue to push forward, to continue so we can continue our way, and our songs will be able to be passed on to the next generation and so forth. And so with that, I thank you again.
Thank you, Phil. I'm inspired by your words, and I also, I think before the COVID, you were my last meeting, one of my last meetings before we went into lockdown, a meeting with the governor's chief of staff to go over some issues with our contracts, and I'm so glad that we were able to work those out and get money on the ground for some important projects for the tribe. So thank you, and thank you for your good words. And with that, I would like to move to our next speaker. Our final speaker on this panel is Carol Evans. She's the chairwoman of the Spokane Tribe of Indians Tribal Business Council, which is the tribe's elected government. Carol is the first woman to lead the 5-member council, but she's not the first strong woman in her family. Her grandmother served on the Coeur d'Alene Tribal Council in the early 1970s, and her mother became the first woman elected to the Spokane Tribal Council in the early 80s. Carol grew up on the reservation, graduated from Welpinit High School, and worked her way through Eastern Washington University. She was elected to serve on the council in 2013, becoming only the second woman after her mom to serve on the council. She has worked for the tribe since 1985, most of the time as finance director. Please join me in welcoming Carol Evans. No, we can't hear you.
Hesahal Petsia. Good day, my friends and relatives. Salmasa Tluhisquest. Salmasa is my Spakinch name. This beautiful name was given to me by my late grandmother, Pizza Cecilia Pion Abrahamson, who is a member of the Coeur d'Alene tribe of Idaho. And first off, I would like to say to Kaleen, I couldn't hear you for a couple of speakers, so I had to guess when I was being introduced. I'm not sure. Technology, we all know what happens with technology, especially with us that don't know it that well. But anyway, Kaleen, Lemlemch, thank you. Thank you for all of your years of service. Thank you from the Salmon, from the Simleach, who can't speak for himself, but we know that in his heart, Simleach thanks you for your years of service. We're just grateful to you. And the Spokane people wish you the best as you go on to retirement. Just wish you good health and really wish you the best as you go on. So, Kaleen, I think you are, I have a PowerPoint and it's just kind of basic, but if you bring up the first slide, I can't tell if it's up or not because I'm not seeing anything, but I'll assume it's up there. All right, thank you. I am the chairwoman of the Spakinch people, the Spokane Tribe of Indians, located in Eastern Washington. And my gosh, I'm just honored. My heart is warm right now because so many of the speakers have touched my heart before me, and it's just such an honor to hear all of the beautiful words, the beautiful tribute to Billy Frank and to the governor, to the lieutenant governor, to Deb, my dear friend, and just so many of you. Just thank you for your kind words. Like the beautiful Yakima man before me, the Spokane tribe is in Eastern Washington, and you see the reservation, I believe, on the screen. My ancestors, they were a river people. They were a salmon people. Since time immemorial, they were a salmon people. They survived off of Simleach from the beginning of time. It accounted for about 80% of our sustenance. And we were a people that thrived on the return of that beautiful, beautiful Simleach, who every year just traveled thousands of miles out to the ocean and returned thousands of miles up the ocean, a tremendous creature that just continued to knew where they were going, had the passion to get to where they started, to return to my people. And my people were always thankful and grateful and always had the ceremony to welcome the salmon back. They never took more than they needed. They just took what they needed to survive the cold winter, to survive until they returned once again. And so it is a beautiful thing that my people would celebrate every year, the return of the salmon, the return to come back and give of himself to my people. And so I'm just honored to be able to be here today to speak on behalf of my people, of my ancestors, and of my current day people, to address you, Scally, you good people. Just the words have warmed my heart. I believe the slide you're looking at now is the slide that shows our current day reservation, which is about 147,000 acres, and our historical Aboriginal homelands, which was close to 3 million acres. And you can see that on the slide. I want to share a story with you. It's just a short one, and it's about my current day role, being a servant of the people, being the chairwoman of the Spokane people. I attend a lot of meetings with the membership, and one such meeting I attended where we were talking about healing. How do we heal? How do we heal from trauma? How do we heal from the hurt? How do we heal from losing the salmon? How do we heal from losing the land? How do we heal? How do we heal from the poisons and everything that's in our environment now? How do we heal from the alcohol and drugs and the social issues? And I, being a younger leader at the time, this elder got up and said, I'll tell you how you heal. You heal by bringing back the salmon. You bring back the salmon and we will heal. And my gosh, that just touched my heart. And I use that story a lot when I talk about the salmon, when I talk about our people, when I talk about the injustice that my people endured and all of the challenges and where we're at today. And that's a good thing. Like the salmon, we are resilient. We are here today. The salmon is a mighty creature and is resilient. And with all of our help, we can bring back the salmon. So I share that with you today, along with the other speakers before me, that message, we can bring them back and we will all heal. Like Deb mentioned, if the salmon comes back, we know the water is clean. And, that kind of sums it all up, because that means we fixed our environment so the salmon can survive. Next slide, please. This slide shows that along all of the rivers, the Spokane people, the river people, we now have identified there are 23 different known fish weirs where my ancestors fished and harvested the salmon. And you could see all through the the Spokane area, the eastern Washington, how all the way up to Spokane Falls, going towards the Idaho border, all the way down to the Shimmikin Creek, to the Columbia River, and up to Kettle Falls. We had fish weirs, and that's how we would catch the salmon, and we would harvest them and really be able to survive to the next year. And so that's, that's something I wanted to share with you. When we think about why the salmon went away, and there's so many benefits from the dams that were put in for the region. You have hydropower, we have flood control, we have transportation, irrigation, municipal water storage, and the industry. There's so many benefits that we receive from the dams. And when you think about it further, what are the disadvantages, or what were the impacts? The impacts to the Spokane people were severe, because, like I stated, for thousands of years, the Spokane people, we harvested the fish, the salmon, the lamprey, and until the completion of Grand Coulee Dam, that caused the complete blockage, so that we lost the salmon, which was devastating to my ancestors. Next slide, please. This shows you a picture of the confluence of the Spokane River as it went into the Columbia River. This is before the dams were built. And if you see where the Spokane goes into the Columbia, right at the tip there, that's where our current day Two Rivers RV Park and Marina exist. Next slide, please. This particular picture is a picture before the building of Grand Coulee, and it is in the area of the reservation, on the west end of the reservation, and it is near where we call the A-frame on the Spokane River, and this, of course, is before the building of Grand Coulee. If you look up in the left-hand corner, you'll see an arrow. That arrow points to land that the Wallawitsa family, the Winecoop family, lived. And one of the dear ladies that lived here and grew up for part of her life was Miriam Winecoop. And Miriam had fought hard for the return of the salmon. She fought hard to help our Grand Coulee settlement. And listening to her in one of the testimonies that she presented back in Washington, D.C. for our Coulee Dam bill, she made a statement that also has impacted my life. And that statement was, before Coulee Dam, we needed nothing. We needed nothing. After Coulee Dam, we had nothing. Now, this was a lady in her upper 80s at the time, early 90s, and she remembered the salmon. She remembered them coming back. She remembered the watermelon festivals that they had in this area where she lived. And she was a beautiful lady that was willing to share her knowledge of what it was like before the building of the dams. Next slide, please. Now, this is the same area after the building of Coulee Dam. Marion and her family, I think they had 11 children. They had to move. They had to watch as the water flooded their home, and they had to move up. And so it was devastating for her family, like many of the tribal citizens and ancestors of the time. And so this is what it looked like after she was flooded out of her home. So I just wanted to share that there are many good impacts of the dams. We understand that, but the impacts on my tribal people are very, very severe. And like our elder says, bring back the salmon and we can heal. Through the years, my tribe has had many successes in regarding trying to bring back the salmon. In 2015, we raised and released 800 juvenile Chinook into Shimmikin Creek on our reservation. In 2017, one fish attempted to make his journey home, and it made it through all of those dams along the Columbia River up to Chief Joe, and that's where it was pinged. And that fish was captured and given back to the Spokane people. So we know that if we put the salmon back in the creeks and the tributaries of the Columbia, of the Spokane River, they will go all the way out to the ocean. They'll go out to feed the orcas. They'll go out there and they will come back and return home because they are a resilient being and they know where they come from, like my people, the indigenous people of this current area. In 2018, we had 4 fish return to Bonneville Dam. So we know, once again, we know that if we were able to get fish back up in the blocked areas, they will go out to the ocean and return to us. In the spring of 2019, we released an additional 800 juvenile Chinook into Shimmikin Creek. And the summer of 2019, we released 50 adult Chinook into the Shimmikin Creek for a ceremonial harvest by our youth and our elders. And it was a beautiful day. It was a day that you could see the tears in the elders' eyes just to witness them, seeing them experience children catching the salmon. Something that had been lost for my people for over 80 years. And just the feeling of that to come back, of that to help our people heal, to help our people bring back language that revolved around the returning of the salmon, bring back the ceremonies of welcoming the salmon, bring back all of our spiritual practices around the return of the salmon. And that's what I think was in the tears of happiness in the elders' eyes that day. Also in the summer of 2020, an additional 3 Chinook from the 2015 release returned to the river. Another very, very a good thing. And in the summer and fall of 2020, we released an additional 100 adults into the Shimmikin Creek at Little Falls, at the Little Falls pool. And the spring of the 2020 of this year, we've identified reds and have collected 16 Chinook in Shimmikin. And Shimmikin is the creek that is our eastern boundary. And so this is possible. I tell you this so you know this is possible. All of your efforts, everything you are doing to help the salmon return, it is possible, and we can do it together. Like all of the eloquent speakers before me, we can do it together. All of the 5 tribes of UCUT, we have completed the phase 1 report. And in the phase 1 report, we have developed a phase 2 implementation plan that will be available in the near future. And these are the efforts that we have been successful in providing for the return of the salmon. Let's see, I'm not sure what slide I'm on, but next slide. And can the person that's talking to me tell me, is it the picture of the Grand Coulee Dam? Oh, thank you. I should have brought that up when I was talking about the benefits of Grand Coulee, but I wasn't too sure where I was. Next slide, please. This is a beautiful picture of one of our tribal members after fishing and catching 2 large salmon and bringing them to a wagon to put them in so he could harvest. And this was what it was once like for my people. And someday we know this will come back. And this picture was taken in the early 1900s. Final picture, please. So this is in Utsuk Connect. I have a hard time saying that. In Utsuk in Ek. So this is the salmon that was returning to the Spokane tribe and was graciously gifted back to the Spokane tribe, and we have preserved it now. So her name means she who traces her way back to where she came. And that's what the salmon can do. And this beautiful salmon, she will represent what we will bring in the future, what we will bring back to the Spokane people and all of the tribes that are in the blocked area. Just really look forward to that day when we can all celebrate and know that each one of you played a part when we succeed in doing this. And I could imagine Marion Winecoop looking down on us, Billy Frank looking down on us and saying, "Skaluk, good people, you did it, and we can do it." In closing, I would just like to mention a few things that that you can do to help bring back the salmon. One, support new salmon infrastructure in the blocked areas. Let our governor and your federal legislators know that you support reintroduction of salmon above Cooley Dam. This can be done by building a trap and haul facility directly below Chief Joseph Dam, using readily understood methods used throughout the Northwest region. Let them know that constructing salmon access infrastructure in blocked areas above these dams will create new benefits for the blocked area. It does more than just bring back the salmon. It brings back the clean water, the clean environment. It helps the recreational fishermen. We know this. It will help the salmon. We will have more salmon going into the river, going out to the ocean and coming back. Two, the second thing you can do is contact your electric utility company. If you use electricity in the Northwest, you know the benefits. The electricity is stable, it is reliable, it is carbon-free power and inexpensive. And those are huge benefits of the Northwest area. So let the utility companies know that it's important that we bring back the salmon. Tell your utility company that you support reintroduction of salmon into the blocked areas above Chief Joe and Grand Coulee. The cost will be nominal compared to the almost $2 billion worth of power generated at these facilities. And finally, number three, environmental justice is often a discussed topic in today's world. As we know, environmental justice is when one community benefits from an environmental harm while another community suffers from that harm with no shared benefits and mitigation. As I spoke earlier, the trauma to my people of losing the salmon was devastating. Here, in this case, the benefits of Grand Coulee Dam through flood control, irrigation, and power primarily benefit people outside of the blocked area in the Upper Columbia region. Many people in the blocked area might not even know the streams like the Spokane River once was a significant home to the steelhead and salmon population. The blocked area has suffered the loss of salmon to benefit the lower rivers, flood at the benefit of the lower rivers flood control, the mid-Columbia's irrigation projects, and the Northwest power grid. These benefits have been at the loss of salmon. So I guess in a nutshell, let your governors, your state and federal legislators know that you support addressing this environmental justice issue. I really thank you all for allowing me, Samasa, to be a part of your group discussion today and on this panel. It's been an honor to speak on behalf of my people and on behalf of Simleach, the salmon, the resilient creature who will come back, because we're going to work together to make that happen. She uhoy, that is all I have to say. Lemlemch, thank you from the bottom of my heart.
It's great photos and a walk through our history. I'm glad that the legislature this year put some money in our budget to pass through to dealing with the monitoring and other issues about reintroduction above Chief Joseph and Grand Coulee. So hopefully there'll be continued progress on that front. So thank you so much. Wow, what a great way to start off our conference in 2021. The next set of sessions begins at 10:45. Hope they are all as great as this one has been. And just in parting comments, it's been a pleasure to work with all of you. I guess when I gave my notice about retirement, I was unprepared for the love that was going to come from all of you that I've worked with over the years. And I'm humbled by it and inspired by all of you. So keep up the good work and goodbye.